So before I hand the mic over to panelists, I would like to start by sharing with you just how fast the population aging is unraveling around the globe. The 2017 UN report projects that world's population, aged 60 and older, will grow to approximately 40% by 2050. And Singapore stands as one of the fastest aging countries, along with South Korea, my own, and Japan. Yet population aging is not only a problem of advanced economies. The number of older persons in developing countries is expected to increase at a rate more than 3 times as quickly as in advanced economies. So what are the challenges we face given this demographic shift? The impact of population aging, as well as policy and program efforts designed to provide relief, are unevenly divided across age groups, gender, race, and so on, potentially leading to further social fragmentation and intergenerational gap. So how will Singapore and other societies facilitate productive, purposeful, and healthy aging, while at the same time promoting better intergenerational relations and social cohesion? So with these questions in mind, we'll now turn to the panelists to share their thoughts on the impact and consequences of population aging, as well as various policy and program efforts to address the demographic shift. I'm confident that our panelists will provide nuanced answers to my questions. So please help me welcome Professor Jean Young, our first speaker of the session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Zuan, for putting this panel together and involve me in this very important dialogue. I actually haven't taught for more than 3 years, so it's a good feeling to be back in the classroom. I hope what I will share today will be useful to you. So as our recent, let me go back. I will be talking about productive, healthy aging as a multi-generational framework for Singapore and in Singapore. And our latest population brief, 2022, that just released 2 weeks ago, you know that now we have about 18% of the population that are 65 and older, compared to about 11% 10 years ago, a decade ago. The 80s and above, who needs the most care, we often call it oldest old, has now increased to 3.7% as well. And with the total fertility rate of 1.12, one of the lowest in the world, and life expectancy of about 84, one of the longest in the world. The consequence is that you have one of the fastest aging in the world too, as Zuan already alluded to. What took other Western countries, France and United States, for example, a lot longer to transition from an aging society to an aged society, as you can see here, took Singapore only 17 to 18 years to do that. And we've already passed that threshold, and pretty soon we'll reach the super age society. That means 20% of the total population is 65 and older, and of course things are going to continue, and the working age population as conventionally defined up to age 64 has been decreasing. So the productive aging under this kind of demographic landscape has been used and proposed as a very popular developmental strategy, actually. And that views older people not as just a burden that is going to bankrupt our national budget and drags us all down in terms of healthcare system and tax and all that, but as an asset that can benefit the society with the longer healthy life expectancy, not just life expectancy, but healthy life expectancy, and the rich human capital. This is mostly a response to what we've been talking about, the declining, changing labor market and the family structure in the population. And in this framework, we look at older adults not just as beneficiaries, but as an active aging, a primary active agent that can do something to contribute to a society so that the society can reach this ultimate goal of a harmonious development. But of course, the trick is how to do it in such a way that benefits individuals as well as the society as a whole and the family system as well. And not this different from successful aging and active aging that you may be more familiar with, that focus more on biological benefits, the health aspect, or the social connection, social involvement to the society. Productive aging has the emphasis on integration, integrate older population into the society, and so they can continuously contribute. So if you think of it, this is consistent with this multi-generational concept, right? You're not moving the old people to somewhere and isolate them somewhere else. They are in the society and will be working with other generations, young people, and contribute to the society. And of course, later we recognize that you can't just extend the labor market ages. You have to keep people healthy as well so that they can contribute. So this health and longevity has been one of the key things that has also been talked about a lot, especially in UN lately. Defining productive aging is not straightforward, but so far I think the researchers have consensus that activities that provide value to society and themselves, the older adults, this value can be intrinsic or non-intrinsic. The activity can be a paid work or a non-paid work. Often it includes market activities, caregiving, and volunteering work. And some later also include self-development, like learning different things to help themselves. Productive aging perspective, has been developed in the United States in 80s and 90s after they found out that actually a lot of people after 75 are still very active. And the study shows that there's clear health benefit, improved cognitive performance, satisfaction of life, and longevity, and so on. And mostly, also, it reduces cost of physical and mental illness later in life. And the most recent National Academy of Medicine report that just released not long ago also talked about that. If a nation does not do that, then it could face higher physical burden, lower GDP, and have more people living with poor health and being dependent on others. So this is productive aging needs a whole set of social environmental infrastructure changes to support that idea, so multiple generations of people can work together and live together. And this has been in practice in many countries, most notably in Japan, right? That they have older people contributing in daycare and schools, in farm work, working with different generations to contribute, and tutoring and teaching them in different kind of activities. Also in Taiwan, have involving old age, these two ladies are 94 and 92 when I visited them, and they work with young entrepreneurs together to in these restaurants, I think 2 or 3 days a week, not on a full-time basis. These are all examples, and if you look at the research, our research reviewed that, and you can see that most of the OECD countries by now has moved their retirement age to 65 or 67 for both men and women. And our other research also showed that postponing retirement age could also improve the human capital of the country as well. This research was done in China, where we looked at postponing Chinese retirement age. As you know, they still have 55 for women and 60 for men. If we postpone for 5 years, in China, you'll get a huge gain of average annual gain of 42 million females and 24 million males per year, and especially the gain on female workers, because in the last half a century, female education has improved a lot and health has improved a lot. So this high human capital labor force will be added a lot and increase this worker to retirement ratio by almost more than 50%. So these are examples Then research also showed that it's not enough to just postpone the retirement age. Quality matters. If research showed that if transition into a poor quality jobs, in fact, it's associated with higher level of chronic stress releases biomarkers. It's worse than not working at all. So quality matters. Another thing to pay attention to is the benefit of retirement is not the same for everyone, right? High SES group usually benefits a lot more than the low SES. So we need to pay attention to these disparities. People thought of productivity all the time. You put older workers in there, you might slow down and the productivity gets lower. A meta-analysis for review many articles actually did not support that kind of assumption. In fact, there's no clear differences that we can see on the productivity of young and older workers. And for older workers, in terms of performance indicators, in fact, 58% of the study shows that older workers are better. But older workers do have higher absentee rates. And so what it says is that you need a holistic approach, not just to extend people's time of working, but pay attention to their health as well. Multi-generational workforce, of course, has its challenges, pros and cons that have been highlighted in different places, including pros is you increase the diversity that might increase good for innovation. And then you have these mentoring, learning opportunities that build a healthy talent pipelines and so on. Cons, of course, is because of the negative and stereotype for different generations, communication barriers is often also cited as one that's hard to work on. And generations might have different expectations on how to talk and what to wear and so on. So it's not easy. We have to nurture this work culture that combats bias and stereotypes and promote opportunities, create opportunities for multi-generational mentorings and learning and so on. Here, the productive aging research is in Asia is not a lot. A few years ago, we produced a special issue that have about 20 articles that does productive aging research on many different Asian countries. This is for your reference only if you're interested in having a look. But just highlight a few things. Heterogeneities. There are great heterogeneities. In Asia, particularly, we found that gender differences bigger than the Western. And so older women, usually for all the countries that we've looked at, they've done non-paid work a lot more, volunteering. And men tend to be on economic paid work or some kind of formal organization like alumni and so on. Caregiving, there's some evidence that this could be negative impact on health in a few places. So we have to pay attention to this. 2 minutes, okay. Volunteering is good wherever you look. This is good for mental health and physical health. And we also found that growing up in a neighborhood that are cohesive help to people's altruive and pro-social behaviors, and better infrastructure also help with productive aging. So Singapore has done a whole lot in terms of promoting this productive aging, retirement age, lifelong learning, and so on. And they have also encouraged aging in place, provide incentive for people, multi-generation to live together, and enhance community network to encourage volunteering, stay active, and lifelong learning activities, and also encourage people to volunteer and donate. I want to share just quickly, 1 minute, sorry, our more recent research project that we have is a Tier 2 project that I work with my colleagues that include people 65 and 79 in Singapore. By now, the 60% of them has already retired and 30% of them are working still, either full-time or part-time. When we asked them, for those who are not working, many of them has already retired by age 60, because these are generation that, you know, before, prior to government had extended the retirement age and so on. 70% retired by age 65. But for those who are not retired, 73% said they never want to retire. They never want to retire. And motivation for working, social interaction, make money, contribute to society. A large proportion of people say that. Why are people not working? Because they have other family affairs to take care of, and they think that no one wants to hire old workers. Some of them had experienced discrimination at work, and about 20% actually has said that they have ever experienced some discrimination at work. And then old people, some of the attitude about old people, 83% think they should continue to be socially engaged and always working regardless of age. How old is old? Only 6% of people think 60 is old. 34% think 70 is old, and so on. So what age should people retire? 1 in 5 says 65, and 1 in 3 says 70, and so on. So Singaporeans want to work. Are they willing to learn new skills? 20% will learn new skills, 45% want to also learn new skills as well. But there is, what do they want to learn? Computer-related fitness and so on. And for those who wants to learn, not too many, the percentage is low that they're actually learning things. And enrollment in these kind of government-sponsored program is also low. So there's clearly a gap that needs to be bridged there. Singaporeans are taking care of grandchildren a lot. About 65 of women and 55 of men too, grandfathers too, have ever taken care of at least one child, and with a maximum of 6 children. So not to 64% have ever volunteered, and 57 have ever donated, and the community activity involvement is not very high yet. So that's, okay, one more. Technology use, a lot of them use frequently, 68% on all different kind of things, mostly to connect with family members, social networking, and leisure, and so on. And a large proportion is learning from children and grandchildren. So multi-generational thing is happening. So it's just some policy consideration that we have already mentioned. So I'll just leave it at that because of time constraint. I'm sorry I go over a little bit.
And we'll hear next from Mary Ann.
So as I was introduced, I ran a foundation that worked in the community for the last 30 years. So I'm one of those been around the block for quite a long time. So I'm not an academic, so I'll just speak from my experience working with communities, older people and families, and of course my observation of the changes that occurred over the 30 years that I worked in this sector, working with older people in Singapore. So firstly, I think generally speaking, as Professor Young had mentioned, the general sentiment is that older people is a burden and aging is a silver tsunami. Have you heard that before? Many times, right? So, of course, increasingly the evidence has shown that it's not so. And one of the main reasons why it's thought that way was also because older people, particularly the older generation, who had poor access to education and healthcare, did not do well physically, right? They had more illnesses, they had more disability. So therefore, you know, not only are they not able to take care of themselves, but then someone will quit their job and take care of them, and family can't take care of them, the government's paying for them, so it's very expensive. So the question always is older people a burden? Is living the 30 years, which is the benefit of progress, a burden? Because all of us will be there. If you're lucky enough, we'll all be 70, 80 plus years old because it is a benefit of progress. So the weirdest thing is that for years, people look for the immortal pill to make us live longer, right? Everyone wants to live long. May you live to 100 years, right? When your birthday, people say, right? 100 years not even long enough these days, right? But you lived 100 years, but now you're living longer. Suddenly, it is a problem. Is it really a problem? The question is, if there is an issue with health and care, then whose responsibility is it and who shall pay? And I think that is always the the debate, right? So who shall pay? Younger generation will have to pay for the older generation. That's how the conversation goes. But let me just step back and say, just think about this. This is a festival idea, so let's think about this. So who is really responsible? Frankly, was it individual, the family, the community, the society? Who is responsible for what? Let's think about this. So of course, individually say, of course, the one major thing about poor health and poor function and therefore become, with needs for care is health and function. So of course, everyone would say everyone should live as healthy as possible, be able to have a healthy lifestyle and staying active. And so hopefully you live well with no disability and just drop off. That was my husband. He was a physicist. He did great until early 60s. We went on holiday. He just died. Not one day of disability, right? But not everyone lives like that. It's actually hard for people who survive that, right? Just one day he just died. But some people will have years of disability. Right now, women in particular, on average, will live 10 years with some kind of disability. But even though, of course, that could be improved. So the key is how much can we do to keep ourselves healthy? Healthy starts with young, and not just start when you're 65. Clearly, all of you need to live healthily, but most people don't necessarily think about, but when we eat McDonald's or whatever, drink whatever, we don't think about that. So it's a cumulative effect that starts when young and not start when you're 65. Even when you live very healthy and all that, still individuals will not be so lucky to not have illnesses. No matter how well you do, some of them will have illnesses, some of them will have disability, and they will need care. If you're lucky in a country where there's good social policy, long-term care insurance, you save enough money, fine, you can pay for it yourself and pay for a care need. But frankly, if you have to save enough for the possibility they may need long-term care for 10 years, no one will spend any money outside, right? Be saving, 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 so it's not very practical. So at some point, someone will have to care. In the older days, no one thought about older people being quote-unquote burden care because family will naturally take care of them. But of course, in old days, the families were very big, and older people, and the children, and the older people didn't live that long. They lived long mostly because they're pretty healthy. But nowadays, can live a very long life because of their health care, but we live for many years of chronic disease and disability, and the families become much smaller. In my mother's generation, she had 8 siblings. My father's 5. When she had us, there were 4 of us. And of course, for us, there are 4 in my generation, only 5 grandchildren between the 4 of us. So of course, every generation gets smaller. So fewer children taking care of parents who live many years longer with more disability. So there was, of course, always a Chinese saying, that when there's chronic disease, there's no filial son, no filial child, because it becomes exhausting for the family caregiver to provide care for a very long time. So you can't really blame them. And some of them are not even around to have the work. So even if the family is willing, and that's a big question, even if they're willing, sometimes families do not have the capacity to provide all the care. Okay, so then comes the community. Community have to play ball because sometimes not everyone even have children. So the community must come together and be the good neighbor. And of course, nonprofits like ourselves will do our bit in providing some supporting care. But ultimately, you also need to have society. That's why public policy is so important, to make sure there are safety nets, to make sure there are savings for old age, like a CPF, for support for housing or health care that's accessible to everybody and affordable to everyone, so that there is a safety net for all. So in the end of the day, everybody has responsibility. Everyone has to play a part. And some of them will do really well, like my husband, who paid for himself at not one day of extra cost to anybody, and others will need many years of it. So everyone has a role to play. So all of you, please live healthily, save money, and also build future good policies that's good for everyone, not just for older people, because all of us will become old one day, all of us. Right? If you're lucky enough, all of us will be old. We're not different. Older people is not a separate animal in itself that's different from all of us, right? It's all integrated. So it's really important to think about policies, not just only good for older people, but really good for everyone, because frequently what's good for older people is also good for us. When they've ever put a footbridge that's good for older people with an elevator or something, it's good for people with broken legs, mothers who have baby strollers carrying groceries. It's really something that's good for everyone. So don't think older people being special, needing something special the rest of us don't need, because it's actually not really true. Okay, so this is the thing. So the question is, how do we decide who should pay for what? And this is really the crux of the issue that I've been thinking a lot about. It's really the strength of the intergenerational solidarity. When I first moved to Singapore from New York, If you talk about nursing homes to families, that is an unthinkable thought. Because the thought of just putting someone away from family it cannot be considered. Recently, I had a little chat with my colleagues, and one of them was saying that she was asking her son, who was 15, when I grow old, would you take care of me, right? And so son said, no problem, Mom, and he's a nice boy. I will find the best nursing home, okay? Because to him, this became a social norm. When they grow old, you put your mother in a nursing home. And he wasn't being cheeky, he's a nice boy. It just reflects what he's hearing in society today. Okay, but putting someone in a nursing home in a Singapore context is actually pretty not nice. I don't know of any older person who volunteered to go to one. They go without complaint because they do not want to burden their children. If that's the best decision for children, they will go. But I don't find anyone who is happy to go voluntarily. Of course, one day we can go some fancy ones that people can afford, but at this point, most of them are not the kind that you want to live in because there's so many rules about when you get up, what to eat, what you wear, what you do. All the things we take for granted every day, decision-making, is deprived of them. So we could do better, for sure. But right now, the way things are is, generally speaking, not all a nursing home like that, but most of them are not so nice, okay? So I think, generally speaking, we have to make the space. So beyond the policy, solidarity is really our attitude, right? How much do we value our sort of some equitable allocation of resource to the older citizens of our country? If you think they're important, you would invest. I was just in Japan, came back yesterday, and I think Gina showed some pretty interesting photographs. They have an interesting thing about community. Community is everybody. Whether you're old or young, with disability or dementia or not, it doesn't matter. When they create a service, it's for everybody. If it's a community, it's for everybody. It's a gym, it's for everybody. They don't say these are young people and old people, put them in different places, they have special needs. They just create something that's inclusive of all, which is a really wonderful attitude. But they're willing to invest because they think everyone in the community are important. So, they have a pretty amazing long-term care insurance, extremely expensive. I think they're trying to trim a bit as well because it's quite expensive. But the fact what they put in the first place in year 2000 was incredibly generous because they believed it was important to support the older citizens just like anybody else. Okay, so I think the question of the intergenerational solidarity, I think to me is coming to question in Asian context, even in Singapore context. Because I do feel over the 30 years I work with older people in the family, the amount of effort the family makes or not make, or choose to spend or not choose to spend has changed. Generally speaking, towards less. It's not sometimes that they can't afford, they just rather not spend. If I say, your mother would benefit being a day center because instead of being home all the time, being very social isolated, being lonely, losing function, come to a social, social environment where they can have a life. You're too busy, but we can create an environment where they can have a life. You can provide the social and healthcare for them as well. But it costs some money. There's some subsidy, but the family will still pay something. Over the years, the same family with the same socioeconomic background, the willingness to pay has gone down. Not that they can't afford, they rather spend on the holiday or something else. It's a choice. I'm not being judgment, but I'm observing that this intergenerational solidarity amongst the current generation of older people and their middle-aged children have come softer. So my question is, why is that? And now this is the idea. Since it's about festival ideas, I've thought about this a great deal for many years. Why is it that cultures, great religions or Asian cultures, Confucian cultures, focus so much on the fact that you have to honor your parents? They don't say take care of your children. It's always about honoring your parents. Why is that? Is it because the natural inclination to care is actually not really as strong, and you have to socialize that? That we have to talk about it, we teach it? When I'm growing up, I'm still the generation who read books about Confucius and all that sort of thing. When it comes to my generation, I'm also guilty. I never talked to them about filial piety, not even once. And they're certainly not taught in schools. And our friends are not talking about it. The notion is just not there. Is that the reason? Because we're not socializing as it should be? I really don't know. I would wish someone do some research about this because I really want to understand what happens when this intergenerational solidarity becomes soft. And it's getting softer and softer as far as I can see over the 30 years. So should we, I'm talking to policymakers, academics, we need to understand this, what this means. This is fairly new. I don't think I've seen the same amount of change the Chinese community anyway, among the diaspora, not in China, and in Hong Kong, Singapore, than I've ever seen elsewhere. So I'll leave it at that. It's a question, it's an idea to ponder, and what does that mean to society, and what does that mean to policy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to... So next we have Christopher Gee from IPS, who's going to talk to us about dividends.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to use my 12 minutes to talk about some things that Prof. Yung already mentioned. She mentioned the idea of a silver dividend. And what my presentation will cover is the idea of a second demographic dividend for Singapore, but for also other societies around the world, rapidly aging societies around the world. So what I'm going to do is just introduce the idea of a demographic dividend. I'll very quickly talk about how we calculated them. I'll explain the first demographic dividend in the Singapore context, and then talk about the prospect of this second demographic dividend. And I think maybe as we go through the discussion, we'll touch on the connectivity between my presentation and what Prof. Yung has said, what Marianne has said, and also what Joel will say later on. So what are the demographic dividends? The first demographic dividend, the term was coined some time ago by Professors Bloom, Canning, and Mullaney. We also talked about it as in terms of like a demographic gift or a window of opportunity. This is largely arithmetical, right? It's the share of the working age population of in the total population, right? And as you have this greater share of the working age population working through, your productivity of the country, of the nation goes up, or the economy goes up. However, that comes to an end when you face this idea of population aging, right? So Singapore's old age or economic dependency ratio, the conventional demographic dependency ratio, you can see here in this chart, the dependency ratio drops because your population of young people is shrinking with declining fertility rates. And that dropped to the bottom, the trough at maybe 2011, 2012, and has since then started to increase as the aging population starts to increase. The second demographic dividend is the idea that societies are rational. And faced with aging, people in society start to accumulate savings, right? They save for the future, knowing that they will need those savings to finance their retirement. This accumulation of savings, if it's done well, should lead to greater investment in economic capital, and deepening productivity per worker. It was first applied to economic capital, but has subsequently also been applied to investments in human capital, in particular health and education. And this is what I think ultimately leads to this emergence of this second demographic dividend. Investments in capital, economic, human, social capital, will all lead to better productivity of the economy, and extends that point at which the society is really, really old, right? So quickly on methodology, this is just a quick picture of the economic life cycle, labor income by age group, and consumption. Consumption is the red line. Labor income, unsurprisingly, is the blue line, peaking roughly in the 40s in Singapore. This is 2013. We can estimate the first demographic dividend by comparing the effective number of producers, right? People who are aged 45 are at their peak productivity, but they have a different rate of productivity than those that are in their 20s and in their 60s, right? So what we are essentially doing is calculating this effective economic support ratio, looking at the number of effective producers, comparing that with the number of effective consumers. The workers, in simple terms, compared with the dependents. Okay? Singapore's first demographic dividend was accumulated or accrued in the period between 1967-68 to about 2011-2012. It plateaued, the economic support ratio plateaued for that decade, and is now starting to drop. We're now starting to see the unwinding of that first demographic dividend due to population aging. The old age persons, those who have retired, those whose productivity is no longer as high, are now starting to overwhelm that declining fertility, that reduced young age dependency. Okay. But this is the second demographic dividend, and really it touches on, I won't go through it in detail, it's too complicated, but it's the idea that you can extend productivity in the future, right? So that chart that I had just now, this one, shows a very static picture of labor income and consumption in 2013, right? But if we can start to think about how we could extend the labor income curve rightwards, right, and increase it even higher, you can see how that, that surplus that is generated during the working age is increased, and this would allow society, people, individuals, to extend their productivity over their life course. So that's the second demographic dividend, and how do we do that? Okay, I'm going to shift back and say this is what's happened in the past. This is the first demographic dividend. I say there that the first demographic dividend contributed 38% of Singapore's GDP per capita growth between 1967 and 2012. And you can see the economic support ratio rise from 0.48 to 1.41 at the, around about 2003. But as I said earlier, it's now starting to ease off, and we're starting to see that reversal, which will result in a 1.6% per annum drag on GDP per capita in the next 45 years. The second demographic dividend, and we've estimated the second demographic dividend, and that's the blue line. We started to see this is just modeling the economic capital, right? We haven't yet done the work to estimate the effects of, well, actually I've done the effects of education. Later on I'll show you that. But this is just looking at the additional investment in economic capital. And what we see there is that in between 1990, 2000, and 2010, we got that second demographic dividend emerging from the greater investment in economic capital, right? And that boosted Singapore's productivity. And in those years, productivity growth was quite strong, defined in economic terms. But it started to fade away because this is quite a static number. I've not projected forward any improvements in productivity going forward. So it kind of peters away. And so the conclusion is we've already accumulated a lot of economic capital. From here on, if we're going to find a second demographic dividend, it really needs to come from human capital, investments in human capital, and investments in social capital. That's where it's really going to come from. And I'm going to show you how that might come about. So this is a comparison between our labor income profile in 2013 as compared with the work that we've just done and completed on 2018, okay? Looking at the labor income by age group. The line is 2013, but 2018 is the end of the arrows, right? And what we're seeing is essentially that extension of that point where labor income peaks, right? Quite a bit, actually. we're also seeing a postponement at that point which that decline comes through, right? So it's actually a very positive sign. What's that coming from? It's from higher educational attainment. We have strong momentum in the numbers of people attaining higher and higher education. This leads to improved labor outcomes, employment outcomes through their life course, and then therefore they can earn more and save more, therefore. The changing nature of work also helps that. The shift from manual work to more knowledge work will also facilitate this process of higher productivity and ability to work longer. Yeah. The second demographic dividend, I think, is primarily an educational dividend. Okay, and this is the chart for Singapore's population by age and by education in 2060. In my slides, actually, in my PowerPoint, which we're not showing, I have a graphic that shows the difference between 1980 and 2060. Anyway, by 2060, 85% of the population is projected to have some kind of tertiary education in Singapore. That's a really high number. Okay, so if we continue to see this, and that many people in Singapore are actually educated to a tertiary level, you should see that gain, that boost in productivity. There's also a health dividend, right? And again, it's correlated. Education and health are hugely correlated. And if we continue to see improvements in health outcomes, and here I projected the healthy and unhealthy population. Again, I have the graphic animation going from 2010 to 2050. What it shows is that the unhealthy population should become older over time and shrink in terms of proportion as well. Okay, I won't go through the the right-hand diagram, apart from to say that this is Japan. That shows you the Japan labor income and consumption profiles by age from 1984 to 2000 and, what is it now? I can't see it, 2009. Okay, so this encompasses what Marianne said just now about the introduction of long-term care insurance in Japan. This happened in 2000, right? And what you see is two things happening. The labor income curve is shifting upwards and towards the right, which is what I was suggesting just now, happening in Singapore as well. On the consumption line, you see a big jump in the red and the next line, lime green. Okay, that's 2003 and 2004 and 2009. Okay, those 2 years after the introduction of long-term care insurance. Okay, so the consumption spiked. Presumably that helped some welfare gains in there, but clearly there is some question as to who pays, who's paid for that. In the case of Japan, society paid because it was a universal insurance scheme. Extending the dividend accumulation phase is essentially this second demographic dividend. If we now model the educational momentum, 85% of the population attaining tertiary level education, this is what potentially could happen. You can postpone that point at which society as a whole moves from an aggregate life cycle surplus to an aggregate deficit. It goes from 2027 to possibly as far out as in the 2040s. Okay, so quite a significant gain if we just continue these educational dividends, this second demographic dividend. Okay, there are other demographic dividends that could accrue. There are some work done by Professor Linda Fried, that talks about this third demographic dividend potentially. It's now shifting away from human capital to more social capital, in my mind. And also a gender dividend, and I wouldn't have time to talk about that.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Joelle, our last speaker.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me? Not too good? Okay? Yeah, all right. Oh, okay, so let's try this line. All right. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ziwon, and the event organizers for inviting me to the panel. I'm a faculty here at the LKY School, and I'm happy to be here today to share with you on the topic of aging in Singapore and social insurance. So clearly, Mary Ann, in her speech just now, mentioned about the role of community, about nonprofits, and about the role of society. And here, social insurance is really the role of the governments intervening, stepping in to help our older people in Singapore. As an insurance economist in public policy, I find two schemes particularly fascinating. One of them is the CPF Life Scheme. CPF, for some of you who are from overseas, CPF stands for Central Provident Fund, and it is our national pension system. And Life stands for Lifelong Income for the Elderly. It is a longevity insurance scheme, it's mandatory, and is administered by the CPF board, which is our pensions board. The other scheme is the CareShield Life. In contrast, it's a disability insurance scheme. As was mentioned by Chris as well, it's actually a long-term care insurance scheme. Although in Singapore, we call it severe disability scheme. But they mean the same thing, actually, right? And it's also mandatory, but it's administered by our Ministry of Health. So both are social insurance schemes in the sense that they are government administered, they are contribution based, which means that to participate in this scheme, you have to contribute some of your salary into this kind of schemes in order to enjoy the benefits. And there are laws prescribing who needs to participate in these schemes. In contrast to private insurance, where the purchase of these kinds of insurance is voluntary, these kinds of purchase of insurance is compulsory for most Singaporeans. Let's look at the CPF Life Scheme first, because it has been around for a number of years. It started in 2013, and so comparatively, we know a bit more about it. So it's an annuity scheme that pools part of your CPF savings with those of others. It's compulsory for Singaporeans and PRs, for those who are born in 1958 or after, and have at least 60,000 in their retirement savings in their CPF accounts, right? So by and large, it's almost mandatory for all Singaporeans and PRs. It is an annuity scheme, as I mentioned. It pools your savings with those of others, and in exchange, it gives you a monthly payout, say $1,000 and $1,200 per month, starting from age 65 for as long as you live, okay? Which means until death. So what I show in this diagram is that basically what this scheme does is to put all of us in a risk pool, okay? Risk pool shown by the dotted line. And in this risk pool, you have some people with higher life expectancies, some with lower life expectancies. So we call these people, some of whom are the long-lived, they'll live to a ripe old age, and they could get 20 and 30 years of payout from this scheme. And then you have the short-lived, right? Perhaps people with poor health conditions, perhaps people who work in hazardous jobs, right? And these short-lived people will only get about 10 to 15 years payout, say, from this scheme, all right? But what happens here is that we build on the principle of risk pooling, okay? So my research on life annuities focuses on a few aspects. I look at financial values of annuities. I look at the welfare gains from annuitization, and I look at redistributions within this kind of annuity pools. But for this session, because it's a short session, let me focus on two central questions with regards to the CPF Life Scheme. The first is, do the CPF annuities deliver good value for money? I think that's the million-dollar questions, right? For some of our young audience out there, you might go back and tell your parents, yes or no, right? Should you continue to live leave your money in the CPF and put more in their CPF annuities. Okay? And the second question that I focus on is that, is the CPF life scheme resilient to aggregate shocks in longevity? And this is really a very unexplored question, not only in Singapore, but around the world, because it's just so difficult to answer this kind of question mathematically and technically. But it's so important because when we talk about pension sustainability, it's important to know that if all Singaporeans were to live longer, not just a few, but all Singaporeans were to live longer, can the CPF life scheme still pay out and not go bankrupt? That is the question we want answers for. So the first question, do the CPF annuities deliver good value for money? It's a very busy slide, but let me take you through it. If you want a quick answer, just look at the yellow box. Yes, pretty good. Okay, pretty good. And what we do is that we use this equation above, which is really a valuation framework for life annuities. And essentially, we discount the future cash flows of the life annuity back to present value terms, taking into account Singapore's survival probabilities and Singapore interest rate structures, and the fact that any unused annuity premium in the CPF life scheme is refunded to the CPF beneficiaries. So it's a complicated equation. It's all right, I put just a small equation up there. But what you need to know is that we apply this valuation framework to different annuity products in the market. Okay? On the left side, you will see the results for the commercial annuities sold by providers such as AIA, Aviva, and NTUC Income, some of which you may be familiar with, right? These are insurer providers in Singapore, and they are for-profit insurers. Okay? If a Singaporean, perhaps I can borrow that little pointer. Yeah, thank you. If a Singaporean with average life expectancy purchased an annuity from one of these providers, he, using the CPF savings, he or she, oh, it's not working. This one. Oh, it is? Yeah. Okay. He or she will get back about 90 cents for males, about 91 cents for females, about also 91 cents, right, per dollar premium that he paid for the annuity. Okay, 90 cents per dollar premium that you paid for the annuity. Now you compare this, what you get from the private providers, with what you get from CPF Life. Clearly, we have a higher number. If you have put your money in the CPF Life scheme, which is also an annuity scheme, but the annuity is provided by the government, not the private providers, you get back about $1, right? $1 per dollar premium that you have invested in the annuity. Okay? Which means that it's a good deal for you, right? So in short, CPF annuities are excellent value for money because they are actuarially fair. Okay, we call this actuarially fair. $1 back for every $1 you paid. Okay, and if you hold it up against the private annuities, the commercial annuities, clearly you can see they offer a better deal. And this is achieved because risk pooling in this social insurance scheme has allowed us to eliminate adverse selection costs and allow us to eliminate administrative loads, such as commissions, right, that you pay to the insurer agents. Back to this one. Next question that I address, a more important one and a more difficult one, is that, is the CPF life scheme resilient to aggregate longevity shocks? So suppose, like what Marianne said, you have an immortal pill, which now all Singaporeans consume, and all of us live about 10 years longer, 20 years longer, right? So my research looks at this impact of aggregate shocks on the CPF life scheme using simulation-based evaluation techniques. If we take historical mortality trends, shown by this short line in the diagram, that's the actual mortality trends that Singapore has experienced over 1980s to about 2017, right? Mortality has declined which is another way of saying that longevity has been gaining, right? Okay. If we take these trends and we project them forward into the next 50 to 60 years, what we can get is this mean average central projection, which is shown by the orange line. And what we can get is also the dotted line showing the 95% confidence intervals. So the long story short is that if the mortality decline were to follow the orange line, which means follow historical trends in Singapore, then we are in good shape. Singaporeans get back $1 for every dollar that they put in, okay? But in the unfortunate, or maybe fortunate for individual, but not so fortunate for the government scenario, that the mortality is declining faster than anticipated, we will be in this purple region, whereby the scheme will be paying out about $1.10 for every dollar that Singaporeans have put in. So someone has to pay. But overall, the scheme is pretty resilient, right? At best, $1.10 if all Singaporeans had this immortal pill, right? So my next slide turns very quickly. I have 2 minutes left to the CareShield Life. And in this paper that I wrote with my co-author, what we did was to evaluate the reforms in this long-term care insurance space in Singapore. Some of you may know that we transited from a voluntary long-term care insurance scheme into this mandatory CareShield Life scheme. So again, what this does, as I said in this paper, it is a landmark kind of legislation, right? Because it brought the issue of long-term care protection for the elderly to the forefront of the political agenda. It also leveraged on the principle of risk pooling to reduce information asymmetry problems in the long-term care insurance markets. If left to their own devices, not all Singaporeans will buy this kind of insurance for their protection. But what it also does at the same time is that it requires Singaporeans, whether they are willing or unwilling, to actually buy such insurance at age 30. A couple of observations. Certainly, I would agree that well-designed social insurance schemes can serve the basic needs of citizens, protect them against running out of money in old age, protect them against severe disability. And indeed, on many counts, the CPF Life scheme seems pretty well designed. Products are value for money, and the scheme is resilient to aggregate shocks. But if you think about it, setting up more and more of these kinds of social insurance schemes and getting Singaporeans to participate in all of these schemes may not be the only way forward. So recent research has shown that another way forward could be to leverage on financial education. If we educate people enough such that they voluntarily go out and buy these kind of products, insurance products that helps them and protects them against such risks, that could be a useful policy lever. So this is coming out from some of the work that I'm currently doing on financial literacy. We did find positive associations, but not exactly causal relations between financial literacy and voluntary insurance purchase and ownership among older adults in Singapore. But clearly, it's still a very new field. I'm working with some of the policymakers, and we want to look further at how the role of financial literacy and financial education can be linked to retirement-related behaviors. So this offers another route forward as compared to government-administered social insurance schemes. Why not educate the population on the importance of some of these insurance products? Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Joelle, for and other panelists, Jean, Chris, and Marianne, for wonderful presentations. So we'll now move on to the Q&A / discussion with the audience. So if you have any questions, please, there's a button on your mics, so please turn that on and ask a question. Please, it'd be great if you can state your name and affiliation, if you're students, your school name, and the track. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Evan. I'm a PhD student in my second year in LKY school. So my research interest also lies in population aging. And when I say that now we are all aware that this is a very critical issue, the population aging is an inevitable trend. And I see all those policy notions like successful aging, healthy aging, or productive aging. They are all very aggregate level of notions. So when we look at the individual level, there can also be the problem of inequality because there can be richer older people. And there are poor or socially, economically disadvantaged older people. Their life can be totally different. When we look at for example, the concept of productive aging, we expect older people to get back to work, to retire later, but these all built on the basis that they have a work and they are able to find a job after they retire. But for socially, economically disadvantaged older people, they may not have this kind of chance and they may be struggling with basic survival. So my question would be, should we rethink the conceptualization of these notions when we look at the problem of inequality? And another thing would be, how should policymakers address the inequality issue in the population aging, when we just treat population aging not as a problem, but as a part of the socioeconomic background issue? Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So I'll make a stab at answering your question. And I think it relates to what Joel was talking about, right? Longevity risk is experienced by the individual. It's a very concentrated one. I cannot predict how long I'm going to live, right? I cannot hedge very effectively against all the shocks that I might experience over my life course, right? So the answer is, in my view, to cater for the disparities in the economy, you need better social risk pools, right? Joel has already talked about Cashew Life, CPF Life. She didn't talk about MediShield Life, but we've got in Singapore 3 big social insurance schemes. Okay, there are problems with that, and they're not comprehensive, but we already have that. But what other risks are there? What about housing? I think Jean talked about nursing homes. Marianne talked about that as well. How do you hedge your longevity risk for your accommodation in old age, right? And I think we do that better, and we cater for all socioeconomic status if we think about how creative ways of how we introduce new social risk pooling mechanisms, right? So, like a HDB life. Okay, I'm just coining that term. That whole idea of that lifetime protection for your accommodation needs. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm glad you brought the issue of equity, because of course that is always an issue. From working in a community serving the most disadvantaged seniors, of course you see that they want to work, but they mostly work in very low-paid jobs. They on average work about 60 hours a week. And it's actually, of course, always those of poor education, poor health, from a disadvantaged background, continue to be more disadvantaged into the older age. So I think from a policy point of view, obviously, policymakers should take into consideration the protection of the most disadvantaged. And definitely risk pooling is one of the ways, because someone's going to pay for this. And I think definitely pooling the risk is definitely one of the best ways we're looking at it. Excuse me. But I think you also have to remember that each cohort of older people are different. It used to be, okay, let me ask you a question. Do you know why 65 became the retirement age? Do you know why?
Back then they used to die sooner.
Well, yeah, correct. In those days, people died at 65. So if you live past 65, you're but the 1%, you get a pension. Bismarck was a guy in 1800 who said to his people, his military, that you live to 65, get a lifetime pension, but rarely do they live to 65. So it's an artificial number that's stuck historically all this time. And of course, we look at the current aging, it's different. A lot of evidence shows that we age later biologically and they age slower. So of course we say the 60 is the 40 of, 60 is the 40 best pay. Definitely some truth to that. So people, the whole dependency ratio about whether people only retire 65 and therefore up to 65 they're all just sitting around consuming and depending on others, it's just faulty because obviously people live and work beyond 65, right? In the old days, I would be a statistic. I'm 67, I would be a statistic, right? I think I have at least good 10, 15 years of life in work. And so I think Chris's point is that there's a second dividend because of health, we're definitely healthier, because we are living longer in a healthier way. Education is also a dividend. So each cohort, in Singapore, generally speaking, each cohort will live healthier and better educated. So therefore, the ability to work much longer, both physically and in terms of quality of the value you can bring, will differ. So that whole, I don't really like the dependency ratio thing, because it assumes everyone 65, everyone just drops out and work again. So it's very faulty, the current situation of things. To remember that really is old ways of thinking, is not reflecting of today what the future can bring. There's recently a study, I think Gina mentioned, there's a natural canon medicine. So a big study recently that looked at every bit of research data and showed that the future with aging is optimistic. Because we all know that one of the key issues is poor health and disability, and the poor health and disability are all related to our lifestyle, right? Strokes, heart attacks, diabetes, all those things are lifestyle related that can easily change if all of you don't drink so much, don't smoke, exercise, eat good food, do not eat too many McDonald's, you'll be good, okay? So I think the point is that it's definitely a different story, but you do need to invest because there will be groups of older people who will be vulnerable. There'll always be some who will be vulnerable, and the same thing for young people as well. So policymakers must make sure that your policy covers the most vulnerable group in that regard. It will not be everyone, but definitely the case. Thank you.
If I could just add something to this. I think you made a good point of, heterogeneity in the experience of aging. And to me, actually, all this healthy, productive aging, healthy aging, it's quite individualistic, not an aggregate level, maybe because my own research is individualistic. So just one example is gender differences, right? You see that women live longer. So at the 80 and above, that's where more than 60% are women, but they accumulate less through time because they're doing all this unpaid work and they get less education and lower income and all that. That's a very clear example of inequality, and obviously policy needs to be gender sensitive. And SES is the same, lower groups. I show that they, in fact, benefit less when it comes to retirement. So policy do need to be very sensitive about gender and socioeconomic status, and of course support the bottom ones with a lot more resources in retraining and finding jobs that are suitable to them. So just leave it. But I want to highlight gender because you see that in some of the country, most of the country, if men and women have different retirement age, women tend to be younger earlier. For whatever rationale that they would give you, they may say this is a bonus to women because they have given birth to babies, so they should retire early. There are other, saying that it's an inequality for women because women do want to work longer to support themselves when they live longer. And this inflexibility of retirement age is something that we really need to work on. I'm 64. I'm just actually just being forced to cut my employment to 50% in less than a year because I have reached that age, and I have all kinds of projects going on and so on. So we need to definitely a lot more flexible about this. I don't think we've done what we can yet, but definitely this is a very individual experience of going through this aging process.
Can I just add one point, which is about financial literacy training and gender? I really want to emphasize what Professor Yang is saying about policymakers. Please always apply a gender lens when you set policies. Okay. Some years ago, I remember asking one fellow in Congress, said, can you comment on health coverage policy about for men and women. It says all the same, but many say, many shield, and blah, 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 okay? But it's not the same. You can say, no, they're all the same. But you recognize women, even now, work less, and they have less CPF in their account, and less money in the pension. And some women never was in formal employee. They want work at home, provide caregiver, all that, but $0 caregiver in CPF other than a little bit most coming give once in a while. They don't have the same amount of money in Medishield. You think Medisave, you think Medisave is a primary pillar for government policies or for healthcare costs. So it's not the same. So I really urge everyone when we look at policy, always uphold the general lens, because women and men's trajectory in life, be work, be health, whatever, is not the same. With time, it would hopefully be a little bit converge a bit. It will be a long time before social attitude and all that will change so much. The female role can be similar to male's role in terms of voice. Okay, so I think that's really important. The other thing, the important thing was financial literacy. We did a study in 2002, and we found, of course, very bad situation for women because many of them are widowed, and oftentimes the men would have, the CPF was just enough for themselves and not enough for them. So they live in an apartment with no cash. Okay, so oftentimes the story we hear a lot is that a son, usually, often the son will say, Mom, you sell the flat and give me the money to buy a big flat, I'll take care of you. And so a lot of the women will say, no, that's not wise, but they'll say, well, I will always be a guest at my daughter-in-law's house. I have no house, nor money, nor autonomy, but I can't say no because what kind of lousy mother will I be to say no to my lovely son's wonderful proposal? Okay? It's gone a little bit better, but nonetheless, we see this trend, and if they don't get along, where will she be? Right? So I think the therapy for women is highly vulnerable. But anyway, so also find that women have third or financial literacy. So when you talk to them about money, and this is beyond social class, wealthy women, low-income women, all the same. They refer to the husband. They have no idea about what the husband has a will, for those who are married, will, what kind of assets they have, what kind of bank accounts they have. They don't know. They also don't want to ask. So also you tell them, your man is not your financial plan, okay? Because you can't rely on a man to take care of you forever. Because of many things can happen. You better know where things are at. You know where your money's at. And you don't have to, it's not selfish to save money for yourself. But most of them, A, do not understand money, so they feel intimidated by it. B is that they feel that it's not their domain. And C, it's very hard to talk to the husband about bills and money and things like that. They feel that it's not very womanly, cultural. Okay? So, but I must say that we then went through a whole program training women financial literacy. We found that savings behavior is very high. They save the money for the children's schooling, for the parents' medical care, for husband just in case they lost a job, but they're not saving money for themselves. We told them it's not selfish to save money for yourself. Learn to save, learn to invest. So we did a study just recent, 10 years after we finished all that. We found that 50%, a little over 50% of women still feel empowered. When they go to the bank, they're not intimidated by people telling them things. They will read and study whatever being proposed to them. They have the sister to deal with so that they can consult each other. And 56% of them still actually now already understand how the families are will. They know the bank account. They know where their money is at. They also save. So financial literacy is important. But it's also empowerment of women to not be afraid of dealing with money. Okay, and be able to have a conversation about it. So I just want to say that financial literacy is important. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so let's go to you first. Yes.
Hi. Hello. Yep. Hi. I'm Vicky. I'm a consultant, public health consultant at Access Health International. We are a non-profit healthcare consulting think tank. So actually my question is for all the panelists, actually, my first part of my question at least, in the context of people being able to work longer beyond 65, like Dr. Jean shared that she had to take 50% of her workload right now. Do you all think that retirement age is still a relevant concept in Singapore, apart from it being twinned with CPF payouts, etc., and whether it can be detwinned in that way? And my second question is for Joel, actually. For long-term care insurance, financial planning, the role of financial planning, at what point, how much upstream must this be done, and what are some policy levers can we tap on to incentivize the uptake, either through like vouchers or subsidies or schemes? Do you think that such policy levers can be effective? Thank you.
Shall I talk about age? Age is, chronological age means something. We have a doctor here, Marian. He knows you get older, you do get aches and illnesses. But it's not the only or the best criteria, I think, to think about retirement. One's ability and contribution and their individual circumstances of what kind of resources they have to provide for their own jobs and to provide for other employees should be considered very seriously. In the United States, there's no mandatory retirement age. That has, of course, its own problems as well. But I think strictly on age, biological age, is not the way to go. I think we need to research more and explore, advance more, because I don't feel like I'm old or I'm ready to retire. Sorry.
I'll use this one. So maybe I'll also add on to Jean's comment. So basically, we have to differentiate the retirement age from something called a pension age. So the pension age is when you first draw out your pensions. For example, in Singapore, the CPF provides pensions through the CPF Life Scheme in a way. And the earliest drawdown age for that is 65, okay? But the government slowly and surely is encouraging all of us to defer this pension age to 70, right? So if you don't make a choice currently, your default drawdown age is 70, okay? They don't set the mark at 65 because the government is trying to encourage us to start our payouts later. And if you start your payouts later, you actually enjoy a slightly higher quantum of payouts compared to if you started at 65, okay? So they compensate you in that way. So the retirement age is a different concept. The retirement age is through legislation, through an enactment of law, when is the mandatory age that employers need to keep you employed, right? Without just firing you for no good reason, okay? So two different concepts altogether. And with regard to the question about long-term care insurance, I'm glad you're thinking that Singaporeans can actually buy more long-term care insurance for their protection against disability. But yes and no, because not everyone would find buying, from an economic point of view, not everyone finds buying such insurance optimal. Okay, so if you think of a person who exercises a lot, eat healthily, it's quite unlikely to become long-term care disabled. And if you think of having to put your money every month, maybe say $1,000 from your salary every month, into this long-term care insurance product that you need to start funding from age 40 all the way to your 70, and at the end of the day, if you're still healthy at 70, you don't get any payouts. But you have contributed so much into that insurance product, right? So insurance is not optimal for everyone, okay? Not optimal for everyone. And what the Singapore government has done is that it carefully differentiates severe disability from just mild disability, right? So what we have is insurance protection for very severe disability, 3 or more ADL limitations, activity of daily living limitations, right? People with mild disability, some of Prof. Jean's studies have looked at those, 1 or 2, the activity ADL limitations. The CareShield Life does not cover that. Yeah. So, but certainly there's room for people who are of high risk to voluntarily buy some insurance for milder disability if they need it.
Just to, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a question, but I think you'll find it pretty relevant. So just to advocate, many of the audience whose average age is probably 20-something, let me ask a question about the other part of the population to all of you. So do you have any thoughts on the fate of sandwich generation? You know, those who are aged between 30s and 50s who actually have dual responsibilities. They have their children to support, and they also have their parents to support because, as Marianne said, not that many of them wants to be put in nursing homes, there's the care responsibilities. So what kind of protection should we give them? Because without caring for that generation, the intergenerational gap will only grow. And also, what are your thoughts about those in their 20s? So there are some countries that are experiencing high youth unemployment along with these aging issues. There's the Lie Flat movement in China where majority of the participants are young. And there's a narrative going on. Some of them are misled to think that it's because of the elderly, not retiring. I don't think it's true. I don't teach my students as that's not the reason. Elderly are not the reason that they are not getting the jobs. But there is a narrative. So how do we fix that? You know, what are your comments on any of these?
Maybe I'll take that first. Sandwich generation is different across the world. In Singapore, it's a particular age group. Right, we've got an older population and a shrinking younger population, and we have a middle-aged group that is actually quite large, relatively large. So, but it doesn't help the individual, right, who's taking care of the older person and the younger person. So I come back to what I said just now. We need this idea of this social safety net, this idea of risk pooling, this issue, right, away. We cannot do this as individuals, we cannot do this as families. We need some structures to accommodate the vagaries of life, right? And it's a longer life these days, and there's more shocks that you can anticipate. So that would be my sort of point of view. We need to really start looking at improving the social safety net. Yeah.
I'd like to add to that. Actually, the sandwich generation definitely is real. But in a Singapore context right now, most people in the 40s, their parents maybe 60-something, 70s, they're actually still pretty healthy. As a matter of fact, there was a study by Angelique Chen at Duke NUS Care that showed that transfer actually for that generation is still down from the older generation to the children. They're helping with grandchildren's university, they're babysitting the grandkids, that sort of thing. It's only when they get to be, might be closer to 80 plus, when they're the old, when they start to have more health and disability issue, and the children now maybe 60. Moving towards retirement themselves. I think for that's when actually the finances become more difficult because, so of course when people have more children later and later, it's possible that when 40-some-year-old, your parents are 80, it's possible. But right now, that's not what we're seeing actually. So from middle to 40, 50-year-old age when you're taking care of the kids and actually the older parents generation actually still transfer seems to be still downwards, not upwards. They're still helping out. A lot of it with the babysitting, with shuttling kids back and forth to school, and helping out with the school fees, and maybe helping an older grandchild to go off to college and that sort of thing. So that was, I don't remember that study was maybe for 3-4 years ago, but that was from Duke and US. The other question is really about young people. Definitely there is this notion that older people don't retire, then you have nowhere up to go. And I think there's this notion of this lump of labor, there's only so many jobs, and therefore some people taking jobs, you won't get a job, which I think the professor will explain why. I won't carry on about that, but it's definitely not true. They don't even work in the same kind of jobs. What was the other question? Oh, that was a question, okay. So for the 20, what was the question about 20-something about the risk pooling? I want to say something not related to the question, but actually related to long-term care insurance. The severe disability is you have to be severely disabled. If you can't do, really cannot, you have to be quite severe because our clinics actually take care of the certification. So severe disability really is severe disability. And you get a few extra $100 a month to pay for care. I think that really doesn't serve a lot of people who have moderate disability that still need care. So I think that's, I think it could be improved. However, the other side of it is that the government provides subsidies in different ways. So a lot of care, like day centers or home care or things like that are provided mostly, actually in Singapore, mostly is for nonprofit sector. The private sector involvement is quite small, but which is unusual because a lot of other places, the private sector play a big role. But at this moment, maybe a lot of families still couldn't pay. But nonetheless, I think broadly, the services in the community, even nursing homes, are mostly provided by nonprofits. And so when they have to pay a fee, generally speaking, they're means tested. So the means tested usually means that if this service costs $100, a nonprofit may charge $100. And if your means tested 50%, meaning the government pay 50%, $50, and the family will pay the balance $50. The only problem is it doesn't always happen that way. The family can maybe pay $25. Okay, so therefore, there is, I think, a gap. So oftentimes, a nonprofit will use philanthropic dollars to cover the gap. So it's kind of mixed basket financing for the severe disability to have some money to pay for care because they qualify for the care shield. But however, for those others who are moderately disabled who still family have difficulty providing care, to get better quality care, we'll have a combination of some government subsidies, some family payments, and some philanthropic dollars to fill in. So that's really, generally speaking, kind of a mixed basket there for payment. And it's more or less works so far. But the baby boomers go up, the numbers expand a lot more, which over the next 8 or 10 years is going to happen. I'm not quite sure whether the philanthropic dollar be sufficient to care for all. But I guess we'll have to see.
Yes, because we're waiting for so long. The last question. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Nitran. I'm an MPA student. So it sounds as though you're all supportive of active and inclusive work participation for the ageing cohort. So my question is around this age group that, in my view, is still young, but apparently society and employers are starting to view as ageing. Like, so for example, our Chinese cohort, our students, advise anecdotally that there's a cap on certain jobs in certain fields at 35, and they've experienced discrimination as they've just entered that 35 age group. And some Singaporeans have also discussed anecdotally their experience of discrimination when they've hit 40. So do you recommend any policies or legislation to target anti-discrimination, age discrimination in Singapore?
Formerly, the Retirement Age Act, Retirement and Reemployment Act, actually prevents discrimination by age until age now 66, going 66, yeah, this year, right? So we actually do have legislation to prevent that, but obviously attitudes are very hard to police, right? So if an employer actually does discriminate on the ground, it's very hard to prove this. Okay, maybe I want to take a backward step to what I was talking about in my presentation. Marianne talked about this immortality pill, right? The immortality pill is a very seductive idea for individuals, but can I posit that the immortality pill for societies is the second demographic dividend that I talked about, that investment in human capital and social capital. In this case, we're talking about investment in human capital. The employer that puts out to pasture people who are approaching 65 is ignoring the productive capacity of that individual. If he or she, like Prof. Yung, can continue, why drop their working hours? Why pay them less and disincentivize them to do less? Incentivize them to do less, right? So that investment in human capital, societies need to get it, right? And of course, laws will help, but I think the societies that do this aging thing best are those that think about the second demographic dividend, investments in human capital and social capital.
Semi kind of serious comment, not really a question, but an American academic friend of mine just told me a month ago that he came back from a conference where they're already expecting life expectancy to go to 120. But what they were really thinking about in the conference is that it's already in view, according to some people in the United States, of an average life expectancy of 200 years. So, I mean, just to set your discussion in some kind of perspective.
It's not impossible.
Yeah, so if you have a substantial number of people, some of these people young people might make it to 120 at least, what to speak of 200 years. And the many psychological, social financial and other implications of that. But I mean, just a semi-serious proposition at the moment. But just
at least on the financial side of things, what we are doing in some of these financial simulations, that studies that I do, is that we actually project the population mortality or longevity forward, but with confidence intervals. So certainly, these days, we are not only just projecting it forward with 95%, but as you saw in the slide, with stress testing. That means if we shock the mortality trends in the system, what happens? So clearly, we have accounted for a scenario whereby, through the various stochastic simulations that we run, a case where there's a 200-year-old person. Yeah.
Just to comment on that, so I do Social Security calculation in the U.S. It's not a confidence interval. Now the big T, which is the longevity, is already set to 125 for our baby boomers.
So in general, biological age has become, I think, back to your question, more irrelevant. Chronological age, and focus needs to be on the keep healthy. Cognitive impairment, that's a big issue, and disability. How long that one can remain healthy and while they're still alive, that's the big issue.
No, I think the medical advances are going leaps and bounds. The biggest investment in biomedical tech is actually things that relate to longevity. It's really hot. So, so it's very hard to know what some kind of disruptive technology might come through. Some of the medication we already know is like prolongs life. One of the very common ones, actually a common drug used for diabetes, they found that if you take this particular drug, metformin, it's anti-senescence. Yeah, it actually help people live longer and healthier than the ones who are not taking it. And that's a common drug. So there are a lot of investment in that kind of field that extends lifespan, not necessarily health span. And so it's very hard to predict. 120 is easy. All of you can reach, a lot of you reaching 100 is probably going to be the case. You can expect yourself to live to 100 easily. Okay, so I think this is a thing that makes calculations all a little bit complicated, so we need people like Dr. Joel to figure this out, because it is very complicated to project forward how much money we require to sustain. But of course, on the other hand, a lot of the changes may also help people to not just live longer, but hopefully also work longer in a value-added kind of way. So it's all very interesting crossroads, because it's so unpredictable. We have not had this experience before. So it's kind of interesting how we'll all live longer. There are a lot of changes, a lot of variables go on at the same time that can really throw the formula off. I just want to make one last comment, which is ageism. Ageism is a bane of everything. Okay, whether or not it's how we think about older people, either within family or society or policy, it's all about whether or not we have prejudice against older people. And prejudice is hard because you don't see it. Right? People are not aware. So that's something that if you make any comments about policy, whatever, think about whether or not you hold any kind of view about older people that may not be true.
Thank you. Thank you for a lively discussion, panelists. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Chris, Marianne, and Joelle for wonderful presentations and Q&As. I'm aware of the time, so we've reached the end of our session. Thank you very much for everybody for joining us. May you all live long and prosper. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you.